right. Hello, everybody. I think we are live. If the live chat can just let me know if you can see us, that would be awesome. We have two pretty awesome guests here today that I'm very, very excited about having. And in a moment, I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and let everybody know who they are, although I'm sure both of you need no introduction. You guys are both pretty popular on this platform, so I'm very glad both of you are here with me today. We're going to have a discussion about divine hiddenness and a little bit of history about why these two particular individuals are having a conversation about this. As Mike had a video, Mike is Inspiring Philosophy, as you can see him on the screen, on divine hiddenness, and Paul did a response on the Paulogia channel to that video, and then subsequently Mike wrote a blog about it. And being the type of people that they are, they're both incredibly respectful in their dialogues and interactions and are working towards a better understanding of each other's positions and where they may differ and why. And they thought that it might be a good idea to just have a conversation about it. So I raised my hand to volunteer because those are the types of things that I love, when people come to have good conversations with one another, as opposed to just screaming into the void about how right we are. And these are two people that I respect and count as friends. Well, Paul's just a little more than a friend, slightly more than a friend. Mike's friend zoned. Mike's in the friend zone. He's also married, so
that's fine. That's a good point. I didn't think of it like
that's a valid point, right? Yeah. And in case you're wondering why there's a cake behind me, it's my birthday, and that's also why I'm going to be drinking. So.
Yeah, you just turned 21, so you get to drink now.
I did. I'm finally drinking age, guys. Today's the day. The big day is here. So I will get you two to just briefly introduce yourselves, and then we will get into the actual discussion. I'm not going to be talking that much. I'll interject when I feel as though maybe you guys might be talking past each other or talking over each other. I don't think that's probably going to happen too much. Or if there's something that my tiny little pea brain doesn't understand that I think could use a little bit of elaboration. So I will allow you guys the opportunity to introduce yourselves now. So Mike, if you'd like to go first, tell everybody who you are and where they can find you.
Yeah, I run an Inspiring Philosophy YouTube channel. It's a Christian apologetic channel. I basically make a lot of graphic-driven videos or dealing with objections to Christianity or arguing for Christianity. Upcoming videos, I'm going to have a series on ancient monotheism, arguing against the idea that the Bible originally evolved from polytheistic backgrounds. Then I'll do some video on flood archaeology for a regional flood, and address some concerns with that as well. So that's what I have upcoming on my channel.
And if you haven't seen his Genesis series, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, thanks.
It's really cool. I really like it. It's really interesting. It's a very unique, fresh sort of perspective you don't see from apologists. I think it's the first time I've seen it from an apologist. So well researched.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I'm right and you're wrong, but it was interesting.
I get it.
So the next person is Paul from Paulogia. Paul, tell everybody who you are and where they can find you.
As Shannon said, I'm Paul from Paulogia, or if you are, all apologists are required to call me Paulogia.
I have said that accidentally. I corrected myself, so I've done it too.
You're in good company with. Well, you're not.
Yeah.
I don't think you consider them good company, so I will admit that.
No, I don't. No.
Yeah, I have a channel that I used to be a Christian, and I am no longer one. And I look at the claims of Christians like William Lane Craig or Ken Ham or Frank Turek or John Lennox and men like that. Usually men, because I don't know why there aren't more female apologists. But anyway, that's kind of my channel. And if you are unfamiliar with it, check it out.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to get into the crux of it. I have put the links to Mike's original video as well as Paul's response in the description. I wasn't able to find your blog on time, Mike, but if I can get it from you after, I will throw that in the description as well so that you guys have the kind of full timeline of responses. I just don't want to omit it because it's important in this conversation as well, because there's some follow-up there that's worth a read. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to put on screen.
We're going to do questions at the end, right, Shannon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How long do you want to go before we get to Q&A?
How long would you guys like to go? I'm pretty much open.
I could do anywhere between 1 and 17 hours. That's fine.
Okay.
Can we do 17 hours?
Yeah.
I feel like we can come to some kind of either agree to disagree or agree to agree within an hour. So probably an hour, and then.
Okay. Well, if you guys feel like the conversation needs to progress further, we can just kind of cross that bridge as we come to it. We don't need to put a finite time on it. We'll see how you guys progress through the conversation.
I was just suggesting that people want to get their super chats in early.
Oh, well, they can do that. If you send a super chat, those questions will definitely be read. If you want to ask a question towards the end as the conversation is winding down and you're not sending a super chat, make sure you at me, at Shannon Q, and I will do my best. I tend to be a little bit garbage at it. Anybody who watches this channel knows that I'm not great at multitasking when it comes to watching the side chat. Usually I have Paul do that for me, but he's busy right now apparently. But yeah, so if you can at me, but hold them towards the end because it's difficult for me to aggregate them throughout the course of an hour. So just hold your questions until the end, unless it's a super chat as it comes, and that'll aggregate for me on a separate screen. So the first thing I'm going to do, you guys won't be able to see this, Paul and Mike, but the audience will. So I have put on the screen the divine hiddenness argument that Mike used in his video. So I'm going to read it off for anybody who might be listening. Not everybody watches. Some people just like to listen. So this is J.L. Schellenberg's argument from divine hiddenness. Premise 1, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving. 2, if a perfectly loving God exists, reasonable non-belief does not occur. 3, reasonable non-belief occurs. 4, no perfectly loving God exists, from 2 and 3. And then 5, hence there is no God, from 1 and 4. We found another one as well from Schellenberg, so I'm going to put that up also just so that we have both of them because they are slightly different. I'm not sure if there's nuance that matters, but that's something you guys can discuss.
Kind of. I just went with the first one because it's more simpler. And,
oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah,
so
there are updates, yeah.
Yeah, so this one just has the two premises in the conclusion. The hiddenness argument is if God exists, there are no non-resistant non-believers. 2, there are non-resistant non-believers. Therefore, God does not exist. So if at any point in time anybody wants me to bring those up again, I can. Again, you guys can't see them. I'm sorry about that. That's just the way OBS works. So those are the arguments as were presented in Mike's video, which Paul responded to, and the other one that I found, which is a little bit simpler. So I will allow maybe Paul, since Paul was responding to Mike, to start with where his objections might lie and where some of the disagreements are, and I will shut up. Off you go.
Well, I actually wanted to see if Mike agreed with a simplification that I did in my video, and that was to kind of get rid of premises 1 and 5. Premise 1 in his was, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving. And I kind of felt like that would either need to say if there's a Christian God, he's perfectly loving, or because obviously we can conceive of gods who don't care at all. And therefore, I realize that lowers the stakes, but I don't feel like I needed the high stakes of, disproving God entirely based on this one thing. So obviously that gets rid of hence there is no God. It just basically would end with no perfectly loving God exists, and that just simplifies how much we have to talk about. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. And when I did the video, it was a Christian response. So I don't think divine hiddenness really threatens basic deism or basic theism. I think it's more of a challenge to Christian theism. So that's why I had included that in there. But I mean, yeah, I would agree that it doesn't debunk the general existence of God. It would be a challenge to like Christian theism, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I felt like that was a weakness in the way Schellenberg had done this. Although I know he's working from
he does elaborate
as well. He does.
Yeah, he does elaborate more in his articles and papers and everything.
And then I guess my second question actually goes to, so as I, was researching my video, and when I was, following up with what your blog said, and I reread Schellenberg's paper and, looked at some of his lectures on this recently, he doesn't use reasonable, in the cases I was able to find, he uses the non-resistant. And I guess I'm wondering if you can talk about whether you think reasonable and non-resistant are synonymous, or if you think that it matters. Like, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I mean, I think you're referring to the update in the 2006 version of it.
Correct, and also the 2012,
Yeah. So yeah, he is updated more non-resistant. I think they could mean different things. It really depends on how the individual defines those things. Because non-resistance, of course, is a little bit more broader than reason. It encompasses other desires as well. So I don't know if they are exactly equated. I do admit I did go with the original argument, although I think in my full video I did try to respond to both, but I just wanted to present the basics of it so people kind of understood it, though.
Well, part of the reason I asked that, I guess, was because I think where you and I think when I read your blog, I think I realized we were talking past each other a little bit, in that you and I didn't define reasonable the same way. Okay.
How would you define it then?
And so I was basically using it as a synonym for non-resistant. I was using it in the sense that I understand that obviously I didn't mean it in the sense that one had to made a perfectly reasonable argument that was divorced of emotion, which is I think where you went with it. I was looking at it as despite all the factors that we make decisions with, and I understand that those include, our brain chemistry, our upbringing, our current mood, the temperature in the room, like there's all kinds of things, and our desires, obviously, those are all inputs with which we come to believe. But for me, reasonable meant that there is some amount of information that will overcome external factors. So, like, for example, if you walk in on your spouse cheating, that is going to overcome all the emotional factors that you may have had to believe that they were faithful, right? There's some amount of information that no matter what you felt a minute prior, that new information can overcome. So does that
Well, no, I kind of get where you're going. Like, new information can of course change beliefs in a lot of people. I don't deny that at all. So I was, what my basic was saying in my blog response is that, yeah, I agree that sometimes people will change based on reasonable amount of information that they're given. My basic point was, like, I don't think it's fair to sort of reduce all beliefs to that. I honestly would say I don't think there's any beliefs we have that you could actually divorce from desires. And I can give a very simple example, like just take the one you use, like that Barack Obama was the president of the US. Now, most people are going to accept that because it's true. And I don't say that they're believing it without reason. They obviously are believing it without reason. But they're also believing it because of desires, because we also have a desire to want to believe what is true. We have a desire to not look stupid to the people around us. And so what I was trying to get at is that I don't think that anyone can really divorce their beliefs from desires or reasons. I think we have reasons. So I think you could say that my beliefs or your beliefs are 100% justified by reason, but also can be 100% justified by personal desires or other desires of that nature. And that's what I was trying to get at. I don't think there are these distinct categories of different beliefs.
Okay. And so, yeah, when I was breaking them into categories, I guess I was, again, just trying to use the language you were using to say that there would be some. So I just want to read a little bit from Schellenberg when he was talking about what he meant by it.
Sure, go ahead.
And so when he was clarifying premise 3, his clarification was, there is at least one capable finite person S and time T, such that S is or was at T non-resistantly in a state of non-belief in relation to the proposition that God exists. So I know that's a lot. But basically that, Schellenberg's argument and mine was that even if there is only one person that falls in this category, divine hiddenness has some value. And you seem to, I was going by your blog that you were talking about, like the studies you brought up. It talks about the vast majority of people can be swayed by emotion, though not everyone in the studies got swayed by emotion, or the vast majority come to it with a bias that they believe something already, so they're inclined to believe it. But it didn't mean everyone. So, would you accept the idea that one person alone would make this argument valid, or is that something? Or do you reject that there even is one person?
Honestly, I think from reading the studies, so let's back up from it. When you talk about the studies, yeah, there were some people that didn't go with it in that case. But a lot of the researchers also made the inference that just because they didn't do it with this particular belief, that doesn't mean they don't do it with other particular beliefs. In fact, some of the researchers, I think in some of the articles about it, like the one I cited in the blog, is notice that we will do this in some case regardless. So if there was just one person who is like a non-resistant at a certain time, I'm not really sure if that person logically can exist when we study human nature. Now, if they do exist, then I don't think that somehow poses a problem for Christianity, like the caveat I kept mentioning, because if there is honest rejection, I would agree with C.S. Lewis on that. So, but then it just comes to a question of what do we know from psychology and how people reason to beliefs, how we form beliefs in that regards. And as I've said, it's much more complicated. And it's the key word in what you said is the word if there is just one person. And that's a possibility. I would like to see if we can actually argue to a probability. Is it probable there is such a person?
There's a couple of ways I want to branch here, but I'm going to pick a sidetrack one if we can, because
sure.
I was honestly very serious. So you gave the C.S. Lewis quote, which I'll be honest, I didn't go and find where he quoted it. The C.S.
It's
Lewis
in his paper Man or Rabbit.
Okay. Can you tell me, like, when I was a Christian, like the denominations I participated in would not have held to that, even though they were big fans of C.S. Lewis. Can you give me a quick summary of like where he derives that from scripture or his theology, like that someone who honestly didn't believe will get another shot at it? I didn't.
Well, I mean, I could go a little further than that. He implies that in a lot of his, like, you see a little bit in Mere Christianity here or there. It's in that paper as well. I believe it's in God in the Docs as well. So it is littered throughout his stuff. I was actually just at ETS a couple weeks ago, and I attended a lecture by Dr. Balby, who's actually writing a book on postpartum salvation possibilities. And he gave a pretty good lecture on the book that's coming out. So some of the verses are like the ones I mentioned about, like, Romans 5:13, law is not counted where their sin is not counted where there's no law.
Right.
Jesus talks about people being guilty only because, they have had their sin made known to them. Bobby also draws on 1 Peter 4:6, for even he, talking about Jesus, has gone to preach to the dead, those in hell, basically. So I would argue from some of those verses as well. I do know that I know from reading like people like Wayne Grudem that they try to avoid the 1 Peter 4:6 verse. I don't think a lot of those objections are sound. Same with some of the inferences from Hebrews 9:27. I think that's wildly taken out of context. So I would argue from a couple of those verses as well.
Okay. So for me, that kind of stands in contrast to like the Romans 1:19 through 21 type passage where everyone is without excuse, and I think that's actually to the crux of the video is the idea, or other videos at least, that the laws are written sufficiently on our hearts. So do you think those reconcile, or are they?
Well, I don't think Romans 1 is talking about atheists. I mean, the modern form of atheists, people who denied all divinity, really, for the most part, I mean, like 99.99999% didn't really exist back then. Paul's talking about, I mean, as I said, the full context, he's talking about people who willingly know God exists and then reject him. I don't think he's talking about the same people Jesus would be alluding to in like John 9:41 or John 15:22 about people who have just never heard. Or Paul talking about how in Romans 5:13, where there is no law, sin is not counted. So right. Paul's basically acknowledging that there are people far off, possibly, or people before Moses who had not heard the law, and sin was not counted because of that. So that's, a lot of the cultural context around Romans 1 is quite elaborate. I do think he's mainly talking about people who know of the supreme God and yet deny some sort of existence because it's more convenient for them. So I don't know if that really, I mean, I agree with you. I wouldn't use that against an atheist because I don't think it's really even addressing atheists.
So I'm just like really curious. So this C.S. Lewis, second or chance to do it. So would you get the chance like on Judgment Day? Is that when you would get a chance? change
to
your
be
mind?
fair, I mean, a lot of what we're doing is sort of speculating at this point because none of us have died yet. And so when I was at ETS, I mean, I was talking to Clay Jones about some of this because he's got a book coming out related to it as well. And he says, like, you know, we have to acknowledge that if we're talking about anything beyond death, it's going to be a little speculative. And I agree with that. So I don't know fully. I do think that there are allusions in Scripture to that possibility, though. How it plays out, I really can't say, though.
Okay. And then, right, because I know I harped on you a little bit in my video. It was like, well, why would you even send missionaries out? You know, if
I think that's a good question. For one thing, I might have a video related to that in March. But other than that, I think for one thing, it has to relate to some of my views regarding eschatology, because I'm not a premillennialist. I call myself a postmillennialist. And so what that basically means is I don't think Jesus comes back to fight the Antichrist or anything like that. It's that the church age that we live in now, slowly over thousands of years, makes Eden on earth again. And then Christ returns. So Christ returns after the millennial kingdom. So the church age builds the millennial kingdom. And we can't get to that point if we don't go out and actually try to turn the earth back into Eden. So that relates into my eschatology.
You and my mother would agree on that, which is not many people agree with my mother on things. So that's pretty cool.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, she has interesting ideas. But anyway, you found one overlap. I think that answers. So I actually honestly hadn't heard that whole C.S. Lewis line of second chances. So that was curious to me.
It is debated. I will get that. I will give you that. I mean, Dr. Barbie's book, and it's like his name is spelled Beilbay, I think. I could give you the actual name of the book and his full name after, because I still have the thing there. But his book should come out, I think he said in a year or so. But it was an interesting talk. But yeah, it is debated. But there are some pretty good arguments, I think, to argue for postpartum salvation possibility.
But I'm assuming you're thinking that someone, like anyone watching this video, probably wouldn't apply under those circumstances, right? Like we have too much information, even if you're watching this video.
I don't know. I can't psychoanalyze everyone.
Right.
And so, I mean, like, this kind of, let's bring it back to divine hiddenness first.
Yeah, let's do that.
I have a question first before you guys go on. I'm so sorry. Because it sounds.
How dare you?
I know, right? It's like it's my channel and my birthday or something, and I think that I'm the boss around here. So what you guys have been discussing, I think that's fascinating because I've not heard that before. Essentially, to dumb it down to Shannon level, it sounds like you guys are discussing that we can convert to Christianity after death. Like you can go through your entire life being like somebody who's a non-resistant non-believer, let's say, in order to fit into the divine hiddenness argument. So like you're not, wanting to sin or just, denying the truth and unrighteousness or whatever. You just really legitimately, cognitively don't believe in the concept. And you can still get salvation afterwards when you're like, oh, shit, you're here. I was wrong.
Let's talk about that for a second, and then I want to
because that makes me go.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, I did. So basically,
I'll mute again.
I have basically been arguing, and I've been talking about this for recently. I think a lot of the objections to Christianity ultimately collapse to hell, and that's why I did like a very long video on hell. And so my argument from reading a lot of what Jesus argued as well as Paul is that the only people in to be there. John 2 or chapter 3, that here comes the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world. I would be in a sense, a universal legalist in that anyone who wants to go to heaven is welcome there. But, as some people like Dallas Willard have said, the only people in heaven are the people who can stomach it. So I elaborated more in my video on heaven, where the reason why a lot of people don't go is because it's a long, grueling process. Sanctification is not an easy process. It's an angry, it's a process because you surrender your pride, you surrender a lot of your selfish desires. And so the reason why most people would remain in hell is because of that same reason. C.S. Lewis's book on the Great Divorce talks about this. It's all these people who take the bus from the gray town up to heaven, and most of them end up going back because the grass is it's like as sharp as like knives, and the fruit is too heavy to hold, and no one wants to go through the process of sanctification to sort of get there. So my views about that, I would basically say, is that if God created free creatures, I don't think freedom just sort of ends once we leave this world. freedom is still an essential part of who we are. It's an essential part of what it means to be human. I don't think we necessarily get to lose that. And I think that implies philosophically that we would still be able to exercise that freedom. But you also have to recognize what that entails. It entails the process of sanctification as well. And so my view of hell is that the doors of hell are locked from the inside. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. So that does relate to divine hiddenness. But getting back to divine hiddenness itself, talking about sort of this psychoanalyzing people, the reason why I don't think divine hiddenness itself is sort of an objection to Christianity is mainly because of that psychoanalyzing aspect. I think divine hiddenness reduces to either 2 points. One, it's just a version of when a religious person argues from their religious experience. It's about as convincing if a religious person runs up to you and says, I experienced Jesus, therefore he's real. It's like if an atheist runs up to me and says, I've not experienced Jesus, therefore he's not real. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just an subjective experience for that person. The other way it manifests, and I'm saying that's for every atheist, I want to make that clear, because the other way I think it manifests is a conclusion. It's not an argument against Christianity or theism in general. It's a conclusion someone reaches from studying other areas, and they may say the evidence is insufficient, or they may see there's good reasons to reject it, and they arrive at the conclusion of divine hiddenness. As if you said in your video, divine hidden, I think it was you were replying to Cold Case guy, J. Warner Wallace.
Oh yeah, J. Warner.
That divine hiddenness is a hidden God is indistinguishable from a God that doesn't exist. I would agree, but I would word it like this: that a purely hidden God is epistemically indistinguishable from our perspective from a God that doesn't exist. So I would say divine hiddenness sort of manifests that way as well. So it's either a kind of like a religious experience type of argument, or it's more of a conclusion, not the argument itself for why one should hold to it. So that's my basic, in a nutshell, what I have with problems I have with divine hiddenness arguments.
Right. So I know, you don't, I think in general, so sometimes I feel like you're psychoanalyzing. Like, well, there can be no such non-resistant person because, you seem to be psychoanalyzing people and saying there cannot be such a person such that they are really just non-resistant. Is that fair?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say there can't be. I would say, given the evidence we see in psychology, it doesn't seem that's likely. And as I said, even if it is, I don't think honest rejection of Christ is worthy of damnation. So I would say, based on the reports I see in psychology, studying people, like, for example, like one of the studies I actually brought up was actually really an interesting one. The title is Wishful Thinking. What is it? Wishful Thinking, Belief, Desire, and the Motivational Evaluation of Scientific Evidence. And so what they did is they took parents, and they had parents who thought home care was better, and they had parents who thought daycare was better. And they brought them in, and they gave them two bogus made-up studies. One said home care is clearly superior based on data. One said daycare is superior based on data. It's 3 pages. It's a short paper. But they found that basically the parents in this would basically pick the study they liked the most. So if there was a parent who thought home care was superior, but they had to use daycare because they work full-time jobs, they started to rationalize and say, well, this study shows daycare is better. I'm going to accept that as the most likely conclusion. And I think that's the way a lot of people actually reason. And I can give a personal example even for this. And I think you might even agree with this. I don't want Islam to be true. I think it's a horrible belief system that oppresses women and has all sorts of bad ideas and implications for society. Now pair that with my belief that I want to be on the side of truth. I want to be on the side of what is actually true. I think we all have that personal desire. We want to believe what is actually true. So if I have both of those desires, I think it's clear that me psychologically will want to say, well, Islam just isn't true, because I want to be on the side of truth, but I also don't like Islam. And that's what this study, Wishful Thinking, was basically trying to show, is that people tend to, what they want tends to be what they say is actually true. So I've been talking for a little while.
Right, but tend to. So I read the study as well. Thank you for pointing that one out for me in your blog. Tend to is not the same as it's universally true. So, and I noticed in the conclusion, for example, or in one of the sections, it noted that the unconflicted group actually did shift their views counter to what their desire had been. They said it was a small amount, but but small doesn't mean zero, and tend to doesn't mean everyone. This is not all unbelievers, I guess, is what I'm pulling out here. Is that like divine hiddenness doesn't in any way try and say that it applies to the majority of people. What all it's trying to point to is that if there are even one, and there's a loving God, why is this the case that God won't match the evidence level that would on their honest thing bring them out of non-belief? I think you would agree that the study doesn't say that all people make all decisions based on their bias.
No, it doesn't say that with this specific category, but a lot of people have also made the inference, like the review I cited, that a lot of people still reason based on that regardless. And although some people were able to overcome certain desire-based aspects in this, it doesn't mean desires were still not present in there. But getting back to divine hiddenness and what you just basically said, yeah, I would agree that there could very well be some people out there who are just non-resistant, non-believers. The question we need to ask, though, is if God does exist, how do we know he's not already planning that? So it seems like from our limited perspective, we don't have a full information regarding the person itself and God's final plan for that person then.
True. Though I think the power of divine hiddenness and those who find it powerful are those of us who believe, rightly or wrongly, that we are non-resistant non-believers. I believe that I am a non-resistant non-believer. And I know you don't like the whole personal testimony part of it, but just let me just taking psychoanalyst out of it. I think you would agree that the only thing any person can really know for sure is the content of your own thoughts, not whether your own thoughts are accurate, but the one thing we know for sure is the content, is what we're thinking.
Let me just say flat out, no, I don't agree.
You don't agree with that?
And let me explain why. People spend years in therapy trying to figure out the dynamics of their own thoughts. It doesn't just, if it was that simple, they could just sort of go in, the therapist would say, here's the problem, do this, and they'd walk out.
Sorry, I certainly don't mean why we are thinking such things, or whether we can properly evaluate for ourselves how we came to the decisions. What I mean is that if I'm thinking, I sure would like cake right now, I can know for a fact that I sure would like cake right now, even if I can't know why. Is it because, Shannon, there's cake on the screen right now? Or is it because I'm really hungry? Like, I don't think we can accurately evaluate why we hold a certain opinion.
Well, I know why. It's because I'm a snack.
Oh.
So that's why, obviously. So, but no, I would say that
we can accurately assess the content of our own thoughts, can we not?
Sure, but then that opens up a whole can of worms about where those thoughts are even coming from, what beliefs have formed those thoughts, how far do they go back, are there things in our subconscious? I mean, if we're just honing in on our thoughts in this present moment, well, sure, I can know the contents of my own thoughts, but that doesn't mean that I understand the entire cognitive processes or the internal dynamics of what's getting there. As I said, it's always 10 times more complicated than we want to pretend that it is.
Oh, sure, but I guess I was trying to, step down a path. So like we know the content of our own thoughts. So okay. someone who is, trying to be introspective and determine why they believe certain things. If they're honest with themselves and they're not being self-deceptive, obviously I don't think you can even know you're self-deceptive. And that's kind of the point of where I'm going, is that we can do our best to evaluate why we are thinking a certain thing. We can try to figure out why we do a certain thing. And at some point, a person can draw a conclusion to themselves. No, there's no sin I wouldn't give up. There's no whatever. Like if Jesus was real, I've said this many times, if I became convinced of it, I'd become a Christian again. I already was a Christian. My life was great that way. I didn't leave because of a problem. I left because of an intellectual problem. So if that intellectual problem became cured, even though if I can't understand it, the best I can understand myself is that I would return to it.
Well, notice kind of what you just said there, though.
Sure.
That was a conclusion you reached. That wasn't the argument that got you there. And that's what I was saying earlier. Divine hiddenness is more of a conclusion. It's not really an argument against theism. It's something you arrive at from other arguments. And so I don't think divine hiddenness can be used to sort of argue against theism. For the same way, even agnostic Paul Draper won't use it as an argument against non-theism, because there's so many other issues that could be building in, and it's more of a conclusion itself, not an argument.
Fair enough. Because I guess for me, and for those of us who feel like we are non-resistant non-believers, it doesn't actually matter if this argument extrapolates over other people.
It's more personal.
What it matters is, if I come to the conclusion, if all the information and all the resistance that I can jettison, that I can identify in myself, if I jettison all the resistance I can, and if I am being honest with myself as I can, like really the conclusion that such a person comes to seems to rationally be no loving God exists. Because if that loving God wants, this sidetracks me, if that loving God wants to have a relationship with me, he kind of needs to bridge that gap. On your blog, I actually noticed you disagreed with me that we needed to believe in God before we could have a relationship with God. Did I understand that correctly?
No, I was arguing against there's no two-step process there. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so I was not saying that you can have a relationship with something you don't believe in. I'm saying that it's not like people always go from propositional knowledge to this. Sometimes it happens instantaneously.
Sure, gotcha. Okay. So, but a prerequisite for salvation is a belief that God exists, right? Like you can't be saved without believing God exists.
Are we entering speculation?
I guess I'm asking. I'm asking what you think. I guess because again, if there is such a thing as a non-resistant non-believer, they can't get to salvation if they can't cross the barrier of existence of God.
True. So you're trying to say that basically if we can't have cognitively robust theism unless we have propositional knowledge to begin with.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So Paul Moser, basically, in this book that I quoted a lot, Divine Hiddenness, first of all, it's a great book. Every chapter has a different author. So Schellenberg has a chapter in there. Paul Draper has a chapter in there. There's a Catholic perspective, a Calvinist perspective. There's all different types of perspectives. So I love those types of books. Basically responds to this in depth. It's basically this idea. And again, I'm not talking about you personally because, as I said, I can't psychoanalyze. I'm just going to talk about person X somewhere out there.
Yep.
So this idea, it sort of stems from the same idea C.S. Lewis talks about in his book, Till We Have Faces. And that book is really kind of interesting because actually Tyler Vella reminded me of it today. I forgot about it. But it's actually a rework of the old Greek myth, Cupid and Psyche. So he sort of retells it from like a Christian perspective in sort of like this terms of divine hiddenness. And it's told, the first half of the book is this older sister of Psyche, who's very mad at God, or very mad at the gods, I should say, and thinks they're horrible. And then the second half is her coming to realize how she was wrong and everything. And it's all a lot to relate to divine hiddenness. And Paul Moser really sort of builds on the similar ideas in there. And so basically it's this kind of idea. It's this idea that we sort of demand sort of propositional knowledge from God on our own terms. To quote him directly, he says, many people proceed as if we have a right to know God in preferred terms. This is, however, nothing more than a self-serving assumption. And so one of the things he's arguing against is that when people sort of demand this basic idea that God has to do X, Y, and Z or I'm not going to believe, well, God has no need to do that sort of thing. God understands what that is actually sort of building. It's building self-serving assumptions. So if Christianity is true, he's going to avoid self-serving assumptions, self-serving processes any way possible. And so divine hiddenness, it sort of seems, is when sort of the non-theist person A out there sort of demands these types of things. It can very easily manifest in self-serving assumptions. And Paul Moser details this in much more than I can in this short time frame. But that's
sure. But even if that's 80% of the people, what about the 20% that like legitimately just can't cross the barrier of belief and don't have enough information? Or you just say there is no such person?
I'm not saying there is no such person. I'm saying that there is insufficient evidence that such person actually exists. So it's sort of the same way with divine hiddenness when the atheist argues, is that there's insufficient evidence for me to make this. I just say, well, there's insufficient evidence that such beliefs are even formed that way.
Right. Okay. But obviously for a person who categorizes themselves that way.
Well, I mean, people categorize themselves.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
I knew when I was 18, I was going to go into the military and be happy there. And it was the worst decision I think I made because I was not happy. Does anyone really know what they want or what they believe happens? It's really hard to say. I mean, I remember being in
You don't think you know what you believe?
I think I know what I believe. The question is why I believe is a complicated process that we just cannot deny is not there. And that's the first part of this process of being human. We have to, all of us, accept that desires are playing into all of our beliefs. If we can't do that, we're not going to be honest with ourselves.
Okay, but like, are you saying it's impossible for someone to be honest enough with themselves to say there's not enough information, or everyone who disbelieves in God is fooling themselves and lying?
I have a question too. Doesn't it work the opposite way too? Like,
Yes.
Wouldn't that be a coin flip? So you can never be certain that that anything you believe is true then, or that anything that you believe, whether it's believing in God or not believing in God, you can never ever be certain that that's predicated on anything other than desire if you take that position. And then, but wouldn't both positions have equal efficacy from that perspective?
I want to avoid the false dichotomy. I don't think it's desire or reason. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's one of those things. And I'm also not one of those people who think that we're basically lost in our own subjectivity here either.
Right.
I think reason plays a role. I think desires play a role. But if that's the case, humans are insufficient to really judge the psyche of other people to know how they formed their beliefs or how they got there.
Right.
And so divine hiddenness seems more either of a conclusion one reaches, or it's a personal issue. It's not an argument itself against God's existence.
So to me, it just seems like an argument against the omnis, right? Like not.
Which is one of the reasons I actually strip off the first and the last premises, because I don't feel like we need to make the stakes of, that my personal disbelief should somehow tell Mike that God doesn't exist. Like, that's weird.
But that's what I'm getting at. That's kind of how Schellenberg kind of uses divine hiddenness, is that the ambiguous evidence is somehow favorable to non-theism. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that you can actually make that leap.
And that's partially why I got rid of it up front. And but why actually for myself and for a lot of people, divine hiddenness holds significant power. Because
sure. And I fully accept that, but so does personal religious experience hold power for some people. But it would be ridiculous for me to use that as sort of like art trying to convince you that God doesn't exist. I don't see why divine hiddenness is anything beyond a personal sort of thing. And that's my main point. It's not an argument against God's existence. It's a personal feeling.
Well, it can be in that, obviously God has demonstrated that he's willing to provide different levels of evidence to people in history, right? So like, for example, Paul, the apostle, got some pretty, had a vision that was extremely real. Other people in the Bible, per your video, got to have Jacob got to wrestle with God. There's some people got more evidence than others. While at the same time, of course, I think you also acknowledge that doesn't mess with free will necessarily.
Right. Because, I don't use that argument. No.
Yeah. Because obviously some people, the demons, have full knowledge and don't believe. Yeah. So it seems to someone like me that if there is a loving God, I can conclude there is no loving God because he is not bridging that gap. I sit here and say, well, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live, and maybe that will change over time, and maybe there's a plan there. But right now, the only conclusion I can draw is that there is no loving God. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, but the way you're wording it is it's just sort of a personal experience. When Matt Dillahunty has debated many theists or Christians over the past, some of them have brought up as one of their arguments, personal religious experience. I always kind of go, and Matt rightly points out, well, that's personal for you. I can't really argue against that. But there's nothing, but it's not really, he points out rightly so. I think that's not an objective argument to make your claim on a public forum. And likewise, that's what I would say here as well. Just because that's how you feel, I'm not going to deny your feelings. I can't get inside your head and tell, no, I got you here because thought A contradicts thought B. But that's just personal. What am I supposed to do other than say, okay, that's your personal experience. I got to step out and go, I'll just argue from evidence in other ways, or I'll argue against evidence in other ways. I don't see how that's any different from arguing from religious experience, just on the other side.
Okay. So if we come down to it, so you would acknowledge then that it's possible that a non-resistant non-believer, one at least in history, might exist.
Yeah, and I said so in my original video because, as I said, I fully philosophically and from scripture argue that postpartum salvation is possible. I say it's unlikely for a number of reasons, as I detailed in my video on heaven. But again, as I said, if honest rejection of Christ does exist, then all shall be forgiven and healed. I think if we're talking about, just put aside the scriptures for just 1 second here. If there is a perfectly loving, perfectly omniscient God, then he is going to be perfectly just as well. So that's why I don't really worry about those kinds of things, because A, it's out of my control. And if we're pausing that type of being to begin with, all will be made right regardless. And I don't have anything to worry about. And I don't see why that would be an argument against the whole issue to begin with. It sort of is inherent in the premises itself.
So if a non-resistant non-believer did exist, they might be better off not pursuing knowledge. Is that right, as a strategy?
No, I didn't say that at all. I'm saying that eventually that non-resistant non-believer would be made right if they exist. So I would say that ultimately, though, even if it is after death, they would be made right. And I believe C.S. Lewis used the example of someone like Confucius, for example.
Okay. How so?
Well, that after death, they would be given the proper information that would remove their
gotcha. Okay,
non-resistant non-belief. Yeah. Yeah. So that's just what I'm basically saying. It's more of the argument from divine hiddenness is not really an objective argument. It just sort of manifests as more of like a personal experience. So I don't see why it's ever used as an argument against God existence. For the same reason I discourage my own Christian fellows, my own Christian fellow believers from using arguments from religious experience, because it's just personal. It doesn't really get beyond that.
So you don't think that, so basically because your belief is that stuff can be made right in afterlife, you don't see a reason why a loving God is obligated to make himself known.
Make himself known? What do you mean by that?
Or to provide sufficient data or experience or to make himself known such that no one would non-resistantly believe.
I'm sorry, can you word that again? Yeah, kind of.
Sure. There's too many negatives in the question.
That's what I thought. I just didn't want to say it.
Yeah, there's a triple negative, I think, in there. Because so a loving God.
Well, how about this? Let's talk about like someone like, or you mean like someone like maybe like an Aboriginal born on like Australia in like 300 AD? Is that what you mean? Like someone like that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously don't have enough information right then and there to know. Well, maybe. I mean, I'll be doing a video on that in March.
Okay.
But so I'll table that for now. But let's just say they don't. Let's say they're an animist. They are born worshiping animal spirits. They die. They obviously never heard of Christianity. They didn't hear about any of that. No, I don't think they go to hell. I don't think they're automatically damned. They obviously didn't have enough information. And this is what Paul says in Romans 5:13. Jesus says in John 9:41, John 15:22, that, sin is counted where there is the law. But I mean, obviously the law was not there at that point.
Wouldn't they be better never getting that information then, because they could potentially make an incorrect choice that results in their condemnation?
Well, who's to say that they won't do that in the afterlife regardless? Because again, it's not like it's...
The afterlife, you're in the afterlife. Like that's like you're there. Like you obviously at least one barrier is there an afterlife has been removed.
But to be fair, I mean, most people alive on planet Earth have assumed that is basically there. I don't know of many people who, it's more of a recent phenomenon of that's basically been denied. So, and even if there is an afterlife, it's not like, I take away the caricature versions of like, you either go to a pit of fire or you're in a paradise and there's palm trees everywhere kind of attitude. It's much more complicated. I think the process of sanctification continues on. I know, for example, evangelical scholar Jerry Walls argues for some form of purgatory in regards to that. It's a little bit more complicated, I would say.
Interesting. Because that's fascinating to me, because presuming, and Doug has 787 questions for you for Doug from Pine Creek. He's lighting up. Sure lighting up the side chat.
I'll remind you, I have told Doug numerous times, have me on his channel, schedule something. Yeah. So if he wants to bring me on, schedule something. Cool. The only caveat is I'm scheduling out to May now. So we would getting a little busy.
We would both poof everybody, Doug. Don't worry about it. We'd all just poof people.
Everybody poofer down. So, but he had an interesting point in this side. Like, would it be reasonable to think that going into this afterlife, that like let's put a non-resistant non-believer and a believer like side by side, both of them going into the afterlife, one believing in Christianity going in, the other not believing in Christianity, but for what they feel are reasonable, personally justifiable reasons going in. They both find out at that point essentially the truth. Like, oh, God's real, there is an afterlife. You would think that this one that went in believing wouldn't be like, you know what, I changed my mind at that point, now having all the information. And the other one would be like, okay, you know what, I do change my mind because now I have all the information.
Why? Satan did.
Well, that's an interesting statement, but what would the justifications be for making a decision like that? Is like, you know what, I lived my entire life being devout. Now I find out I'm right, and you know what? Meh.
Well, I think it might have something to do. I mean, again, we're going into afterlife stuff, so it's always going to be a little bit of speculation there. But it might have something to do with the same reason the Pharisees rejected Jesus. They were waiting for a Messiah to come and liberate them from Rome, and what they got was a Messiah to liberate them from their sins, which they didn't want. So they get to picture a speculative environment. Someone gets there and they realize that heaven is not a giant reward for them. That might upset them. I live this whole great pious life, and what do you mean I don't get to have all the strippers and beer I want now? Kind of attitude. You get to heaven and you realize that it's still not about you, even though you've... So that's one of the other things that I didn't bring up a lot, is that just because someone may have belief, there is the other end. There is the moralist, the legalist type person who's still not saved, even though they believe and they follow all the tenets and they claim Christianity, because internally it's still about them. They've still turned their own moralistic attitude into their own God, and they're using God to get the desires of their heart. You know, Jesus talks about them in Matthew 7, for example.
Right, which is really one of the reasons why, you know, for some of us, we don't understand why we can't all just have intellectual knowledge, because obviously intellectual knowledge isn't enough to get you there, but it's obviously a precursor. So why cannot we not all just have this intellectual knowledge? Because
being a free agent is a little bit more complicated than just being a robot to sort of claim information. The best we can do, as I said in my video, is we got to submit our views to public discourse and keep debating it out, and always remember the studies that I went over, because we cannot pretend those studies are not us. The moment we do, we're going to open ourselves up to saying, well, I already am a reason machine and you just give me the right input and I'll change. The truth is, I don't think that's just the way we ever operate. If you even challenge someone on very simple beliefs like, hey guys, Christmas isn't pagan, who cares? People flip out over such little things.
I don't know if this tree helps or hurts that argument. I don't know.
Pagan tree.
Shows you're a pagan. Pagan trees. Yeah. People very much wanted to defend their beliefs in that way. And so
given that it's a precursor, it's a prerequisite, you can't deny that if that prerequisite wasn't there, it would be slightly easier for people to get there.
But you say you claim that you yourself is a non-resistant non-believer, correct?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I would say, I don't say that about myself. I would say I am a believer who clearly has desires being input into my beliefs. There are desires that I have that make me want to believe Christianity is true. And so I sort of try to treat my own mind the same way a drug addict should treat his own addiction problems. I have to admit I have a problem. Otherwise, I'll never change my beliefs. I'll never be open to the evidence, because I'm always going to be telling myself, well, I'm fine. I'm not, there's nothing wrong with me. So I always encourage Christians and everyone in general, don't do that, except that you may have some desires that might be subconsciously motivating you, and then start to figure those out, start to explore your own psyche. Because if we don't start with that as the issue, we're never going to admit we have a problem, and we're never going to get over our addictions. So,
right. But what you're saying is that I can never reach that conclusion, right? Like until I agree with you, Mike, I haven't done enough introspection.
Well, no, I'm not saying that at all. I mean, I could be wrong. I just literally just went on for a couple of minutes admitting I very well could be wrong. Yeah. So, I mean, the best I can do, and this is what I talk about in my Resurrection First series, we have to, first of all, admit we have that problem. And then we need to submit our views to political discourse, see what have the best explanatory scope, explanatory power, plausibility, the least ad hoc, and provide illumination. For me, studying the different ways to evaluate beliefs and theories, I have found this is the best way to move forward. So just in a nutshell, encourage everyone. Admit there are desires influencing your beliefs. It's hard to deny that's probably going on. I admit it. I'm not going to deny it. I am part of the problem. 2, realize that we need to have conversations like what we're having now to open us up to new evidence, to new insights, because I ain't going to figure everything out on my own. And I'm always willing to have these types of conversations with reasonable, respectful people. Some people I won't because they're not respectful.
That's why he's not addressing me, because I'm a nightmare.
That's right.
I was on your channel last year.
You were, yeah.
And then I think the best way to then move forward is argue that certain beliefs or certain theories have explanatory scope, explanatory power, most plausible, least ad hoc, and provide illumination. And we also should be willing to admit, like I remember I was listening to someone recently, maybe in the live chat, say that if he even found out Christianity was true, he would choose to be annihilated because he wouldn't really want to be with a God eternally forever. And I admit when it comes to something like Islam, that's something that sort of holds me back because I don't think the God of Islam is a nice guy. I wouldn't want to be with him for eternity. Is that something holding me back from maybe evaluating the truth there? Possibly. I need to explore that more. I need to be willing to open that maybe I could be wrong and maybe desires are holding me back in that area. We all need to do that. And that's what I'm basically trying to get at in relation to the whole divine hiddenness thing.
Interesting. All right. Have you guys reached an impasse?
I ran out of whiskey, so I got to pour more.
That's important. Let's all prioritize, okay?
Well, I think I got, so I think we're agreeing. I've never thought divine hiddenness was a great argument to tell a believer that they're wrong. I've never thought that. So I think we agree.
Okay, then I misunderstood you because I thought that's what you were saying.
No, I think we agree there. But unfortunately, what it is it's super powerful if you evaluate yourself such that, if you, so I think I would have to agree with the same advice that I, myself, and everyone needs to keep checking whether our desires are in the way and making sure that our desires are never so strong that truth can't overcome that.
And I would also say for us YouTubers who already have an audience, it's especially hard because do we really want to lose all our Patreons? Or do we really want to lose the audience we've built? It's especially hard there. And I wrestle with that every day.
Though,
it's something we all have to deal with.
Though I think this thought often, how much money could I make if I swapped? Like if I actually ever...
Me too. That's the same thing. I mean,
so it cuts both ways because I think either side would be welcoming via a Brad Pitt or a Kanye. It's like, hey, we won a good one. Like here.
Yeah, but we also have to remember that when someone sort of is set in their ways, and it has also shown some of the studies that if people change their beliefs and they form new ones, and it actually makes them more dig in even harder. So it's even harder for them at that point to sort of even turn around again. Because sometimes I don't know if I'd ever really even go back to young earth creationism at this point because it's like, do I really want to go back there? It's like, it's such a negative view. It's so looked down upon. I mean, I have good arguments against it, but I also know there's a lot of desires there that are holding me back from ever considering that again. And I think that you say the same for yourself too.
I would do the same thing. Yeah,
let me give you an argument for God's existence from that though. Why would God name the most prominent young earth creationist a ham if there was no God? Gotcha.
He named another one Comfort, so I'm not sure that argument holds water. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny. All right, we have about 1,000 questions for you guys. You guys have been at it for an hour. I want to make sure that you guys both feel comfortable with this being a stopping point, though. I don't want to step on you guys.
I do. I feel like I don't have to do a response blog. Do you feel like you have to do a response blog now?
No, I got too much other stuff to do.
Yeah, good. All right.
And I have to say the side chat, predominantly was just really going on and on and on about how this is really refreshing as a conversation. So I'd like to thank both of you for making the conversation have that climate for the people that are watching and that they're drawing a lot from it. And
excellent.
they're very well engaged. So I'll start with the super chats, and then if you guys can start adding me with the questions, because I wasn't able to aggregate them as I was going. I know I saw you guys had a lot, so I will start. So, inspiring philosophy. What is your favorite verse and why? And this one is from Kirsten.
My favorite verse. No, I was turning on the fan behind me because it gets really hot in this corner of the house, even though it's winter here. My favorite verse. That's a good question. What is my favorite verse? It changes.
Can I do mine?
Oh,
sure, go ahead.
You do yours, Paul.
Acts 1:18, with the reward of God's wickedness, Judas fought a field. There, fell headlong, his body burst open, all his intestines spilled out.
All right. My favorite verse would probably be Jeremiah 17:9. For the heart is the sick, wicked, desperately evil. Who can understand it? And that's one of the verses I constantly use to remind myself, remind myself about the nature of the heart. And I use that verse on Christians all the time. Stop saying you feel Jesus in your heart. Your heart is desperately wicked and evil. Don't trust that.
Don't put that on Jesus. All right, Kirsten also sent me a happy birthday, Shannon. Thank you. I appreciate it. From Frank. And a piece of cake. Thank you for the piece of cake. My stickers work. Yay. From Frank McAvoy. Can't God, as the great screenwriter, be hidden if God wants to be? Off topic, Kent Hovind thinks Paul is 20 years old. Is Paul well preserved?
25.
25, actually. That was pretty funny.
Well, you know, maybe Paul, if you spent less time making so many videotapes on evolution, you could. Somebody watches your this more. Stop making all them videotapes.
That's funny. Okay. Neil sent me many emojis. Thank you, Neil. I love you. Neil's got a great channel as well. Neil 604 Atheist. I've been on there, as is Paul. You should go check him out. And Nicholas Chop, this is the last super chat, is God unwilling or unable to say hello? You would have to pick one.
Unwilling or unable? I think that'd be a false dichotomy. I think perhaps he has, but I also have to recognize is going on agnostic Paul Draper, to quote him, in the book I just put up. Am I manufacturing apparent ambiguity for myself, either by refusing to recognize clear differences in the strength of different pieces of evidence, or by refusing to take seriously supernaturalistic alternatives to theism? Am I doing this in order to rationalize a strong desire to sit on the fence that has nothing to do with the evidence? I mean, perhaps God has said hello. I mean, again, I can't psychoanalyze everybody, but I really enjoyed Paul Draper's chapter just for the honesty itself.
Okay, so it looks like there's more questions for you, IP. So question for IP, Fine. This one's from Ibrahim. So I'm scrolling up through now looking for my tags. I'll definitely see it if you send a super chat. Please forgive me if I don't see it. There's a lot of chat. Question for IP, what is your primary objection to Islam?
My primary objection to Islam is simply that it is there is no evidence really for it other than the personal visions of one guy. So we have to go on basically Muhammad's vision, and if you study his personal visions, they match a lot of Christian apocryphal work like the Targums of Esther, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. It doesn't seem like he was getting it from visions. It seems he was getting it from works that was already in circulation prior to that. And there's no public really way to sort of test it like you could do like the resurrection argument. It's more based on his personal experiences. Same with someone like Joseph Smith. We have to go on the fact that he just found these golden plates that never showed anyone in real life, only through visions, and just believe him on that. So it's a little bit different. I would want to see a resurrection style argument for Islam that might make me do that. On a more emotional objection I would have, a more intuitive objection would be the fact that the God of Islam can be immoral. He doesn't have to be the foundation for morality. He can lie, deceive, do all sorts of things, and that's inconsistent with my beliefs on moral realism. That just reminded me. Oh, by the way, Paul, just so you know, I might actually be on David Wood's channel Wednesday to respond to your video on the moral challenge, by the way.
I'm excited for that. That's fun.
So to catch you off guard.
Oh, that's fun.
Because I wouldn't be watching Act 2018 or yeah.
Yeah, I just want to give you a heads up.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, let us know if you guys premiere it. I'd love to be in the live chat so that I can smack talk you. All right, so hey, guess who's got a question? Put your money on Doug, you win. Doug has a question. So, if the doors of hell are locked from the inside, are the doors of heaven also locked from the inside? Christians
No,
could
because
leave heaven, question mark.
Yeah, so did Satan.
There you go.
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so from Nicholas Chop. So am I stronger than God because I can ignore him?
Are you stronger than God? I mean, in what way? Is your free will stronger than possibly God's, possibly testament of the Holy Spirit? I mean, sure, you have that ability. But are you more stronger than omnipotent being? It depends on how you define strong. Obviously not.
Yeah, and I don't see how the ability to ignore something is countered by any of the omnis. I mean, you can, if you're omniscient, you can still ignore facts. I don't even understand the question.
And if ignoring something is a superpower, I have a small child and I can ignore mom for hours. Just hours.
In fact, that's a power.
I'm magic.
You're bringing up repressed memory.
Right. Oh, there's another super chat. Thank you very much, My Unfinished Journey. Off topic, but IP, what is your perspective on full preterism?
Full preterism?
Maybe that's it. Preterism. I'm dyslexic and not good at pronouncing.
Preterism. So I am actually a partial preterist, and what that basically means is we are not waiting for an antichrist or a tribulation. That was basically fulfilled in 70 AD when Titus marched into Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, set up on the Temple Mount, and his soldiers sacrificed him as a divine appointed God. So we don't look to some sort of future antichrist. That was all fulfilled in 70 AD. Revelations is more like an idealized book about the forces of darkness, losing to the darkness, the forces of good. So I'm a partial preterist. I'm not a full preterist. I think full preterism might have some issues with return to final resurrection and final judgment. But I mean, it's all speculative. I mean, I think the eschatology should be treated the exact same way Jesus's first coming was, is that no one saw it coming. I don't think anyone's going to see the second coming, no pun intended.
You've lost my mom again, because she thought that every president from Nixon till now was the Antichrist. She's declared that outright.
Oh, she's a historicalist then. She's not a preterist. She's an historicalist.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So Nicholas said, just to be clear, so God can't say hi.
No, I didn't say that at all.
So he can.
Yeah.
God can say hi, but he hasn't chosen to say hi to me yet. So please do.
All right. Okay. And hi, John Hammond. How are you? Douglas has a question. Question for IP. If you had two choices, one, talking with Jesus at Starbucks when he's in flesh, or two, talking to Jesus through prayer or reading his word, which would you prefer and why?
Well, Doug is not going to like the answer, but the latter, because I understand what the scriptures are talking about. And if you read C.S. Lewis's book, Till We Have Faces, that's more nurturing and better for the depraved souls that we are in terms of what we need and what we to be sanctified. So I would choose the latter based on my understandings. Now, emotionally, I'd probably want to choose the first because I have a lot of questions, but I think choosing the latter is a more intellectually based decision based on what I've read regarding divine hiddenness.
Okay. Nicholas had one more follow-up, and this is actually an interesting point. So where Nicholas was going was that if God's will is that I believe, and he tried to get me to believe, showed himself somehow, then he wasn't strong enough to counteract my will.
Well, yeah, because you have free will. God does not take that away. And so as a lot of these studies say, is that people end up believing what they want, regardless of the evidence. A lot of times, like flat earthers, I mean, the evidence for the round earth is so overwhelmingly obvious, and yet people don't believe in it. Why? Well, I mean, I think the documentary Behind the Curve is amazing because I've watched it about 4 times now, diving into their own psychology. It's much more interesting for them to be a part of this resistance to style movement. So they, not saying this is with everybody, but with they specifically, they sort of bend the facts to be what they want. And sometimes, in some regard, we all sort of do that. So yeah, I mean, we have the freedom to do that. I don't deny that at all. I don't see how that's Again, I don't see how divine hiddenness is an objective argument against God's existence.
So I
think
think
it's more of a personal experience.
So God can't overcome free will, or won't, could but won't.
He could, but he won't.
Could but won't.
Essentially, yeah.
Right. Whereas my objection is, it seems like it could be within the realm of God's plan to still grant everyone knowledge of his existence. I see no reason why he couldn't do that.
Well, I think I would argue that he could, and he does. But again, it's people tend to make what they want to be the actual case. It's not that simple with a lot of beliefs, even if we don't even recognize it. Like that one study I cited even said, what was it? It was certainty is primarily determined by past performance. They said people do not directly observe their own cognitive processes and are often blind to their own internal dynamics.
Sure, but I mean, God could brute fact us, into being aware of his existence, and that wouldn't mess with free will.
Yeah, I don't say it would mess with free will. I'd say it would mess with forming cognitively robust theism, though.
So he wants us to. I just want to make sure I'm following through with on what your point is here, Mike. So he makes it more difficult because he wants us to work for it so that it'll be more like robust for us, as opposed to providing us with direct, clear, irrefutable evidence that we can't deny. So it seems like that's a cat and mouse game that God would be playing if that's the case.
No, I wouldn't say it like that. Let me maybe
I could be totally misunderstanding you.
So let me try to explain it through. One time I remember hearing Adrian Rogers respond to. He wasn't talking about divine hiddenness, but he was responding to prosperity preachers, and he said, "What if I actually had a miracle tonight? Like I actually truly healed someone. What do you think would happen the next week? This place would be packed with people who drove in from all over the world claiming, 'Touch me, touch me.' Did they come because they want to understand forgiveness, understand what salvation is? No, they came because they wanted a miracle." And Jesus basically sort of alludes to this a lot in the Gospels. He heals people and says, "Don't tell anyone." He heals people and then he sort of like sneaks away so people can't come after him. John talks about how people sort of chase after him in John 6, and he tries to scare them away with giving them hard teachings. It's the fact that people themselves are so sinful because of the fallen nature, is that if we saw that sort of activity, we would want to use it for our own advantage. We want to use it in sinful ways. And that's why when Jesus came, they either tried to make him a king or they tried to kill him. They didn't want to actually follow him. And even his own disciples truly didn't understand.
That doesn't change sinful ways, though. Like that doesn't, like, people who, you would agree that there are people who believe God exists with all their hearts and still do sinful things and still use the prosperity gospels. Preachers, for example, some of them probably believe. So again, that's not a satisfying answer to someone like me, because like God could be as ho-hum boring as the sun in the sky, brute fact, and that wouldn't, like, I would still then get to decide whether I want to use that information for good or bad. Like, there's nothing now that stops you from using information good or bad, which is why in my video I actually talked about saved believers and unsaved believers, which you seem to have an objection to, but I don't think you do now. You're hitting on kind of what I was getting at. People are sinful. And so this sort of like in-your-face sudden appearance kind of stuff only sort of exacerbates that, makes it 10 times worse, is what Jesus was trying to hit at.
But you're assuming that would be what the evidence is. Is it not plausible that God could just imbue us with some sort of knowledge or evidence of, like, this is where you find me, this is how it's going to be clear to you, without us garnering anything from it? Like in your example, somebody's going to garner a benefit from that miracle, and it's uncommon, so it's seen as special and people would clamor to it. If it was universally universally available to everybody, then it would no longer have that special component that causes people to clamor and utilize it to their benefit, because everybody has access to the exact same thing. It's no longer special. It's no more special than us being able to see or breathe or hear or whatever. Well, not everybody can do that.
And then God would just be a giant nanny, constantly doing miracles left and right to people that are already fallen. And
no, he wouldn't have to even do that. He could just make it boringly available to us that he exists, and not give us anything in return for that knowledge. Just give us the knowledge without, a miracle isn't necessarily the only way one can come to a belief. One can come to a belief through knowledge and revelation without garnering any benefit aside from the benefit of knowing what is or is not true.
So let me just make sure I'm trying to steelman this. You're saying that God could just sort of give boring sort of knowledge that sort of shows he exists.
Yeah. He doesn't have to be like, poof, here's a miracle or a rainbow or whatever. He could, he's God. I'm sure he could find some way to imbue us with just that knowledge that, hey, I exist. You know it as an absolute certainty, as part of your internal constitution and cognitive structure.
Let me ask this then. Is there enough boring knowledge that's made available by scientists that evolution is true and the earth really is round, and people still reject it though?
I'm not saying make it available outside, external to us for us to access. I'm saying make it available to us impart it to us as part of our being, that knowledge.
I mean, I would say that a lot of beliefs should be part of our being as well, and people still deny them. I don't see how people are supposed to just sort of accept beliefs when they deny such basic beliefs already in life. It's again, people tend to sort of make what they want to be reality regardless. So I think the point
when's the last time you had someone that denied that the sun exists?
Or that they exist?
Denied the sun, because, you know, like flat earthers will say that
that's
the sun
actually
is like
true.
not actually the real sun.
There's a light deny that there's a light in the sky, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, they won't deny that there's a light in the sky.
But so theoretically, God could be as universally adopted as that there's a light in the sky.
He could be. Now, I think what we're getting at is the difference between divine hiddenness and divine shroudedness, I guess would be a word to put it. Like, God clearly is not manifesting physically in front of us, right? Clearly. Right. So the question is, why doesn't he just do that? Is that what you're saying?
Kind of. Because like, again, for a non-resistant non-believer, they don't feel like they're not making an active choice to follow or not follow. They can't even get that far.
Yeah, so, and that moves to a different objection back to Paul Moser's points that it doesn't really get to what God is trying to get to, and he can do it. He can get cognitively robust theism without that, and it's actually what C.S. Lewis gets to in his book "Till We Have Faces" is the point that with that, it actually hinders us in a lot of ways that cognitively robust theism would create. So I don't know if we're going in circles now.
No, because I was going to say, because that just sounds ridiculous to me, and what I'm saying probably sounds ridiculous to you. So I mean, but highly speculative, like something that we're getting into the realm of speculation that we can't know. So
yeah, what if I have a 3 million pound God-shaped something that I could show you? Yeah, well, what? You know what I mean? Yeah. You could do that endlessly. All right, so I feel as though we may have come to a close. There's still a few more questions in the chat, and I'm really sorry I didn't get to all of them. There's a lot, and it's going by relatively quick. I think there's over 200 people watching right now. So hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Please, I'm going to give you guys actually both an opportunity to just kind of say who you are and where to find you again before we leave, because sometimes people tune in late. So I will start with you again, Mike, if you let everybody know who you are and where they can find you after this.
Yeah, I'm Paulogia. I do amazing videos on how...
No, inspiring philosophy is wrong about everything.
Sorry, I got the wrong script. I'm sorry. So I'm Inspiring Philosophy. I do a lot of videos. I'm a Christian apologist. I'll have a whole series on ancient monotheism starting in January through February as well. Or January, yeah, a couple. But I'll also have a video on Valentine's Day coming out soon, and I'll do some videos on the regional flood archaeology. If anyone wants any more information about what I'm talking about, check out the books by C.S. Lewis, like Till We Have Faces, and then this book is a great, filled with several essays, which I thoroughly enjoyed. But yeah, that's basically me in a nutshell, and some other sources you can check out.
How much do we have to pledge before you'll make videos about which kind of whiskey I should drink?
$11 billion.
I feel like if you give him enough whiskey, he'll just tell you.
I'll tell you the best whiskey, which is Talisker. So I said it.
There you go.
All right.
Free. That was free, Paul. All right. Who are you and where can people find you? Not that anybody cares, but whatever.
Paul. My channel name is Paulogia, Paulogia. You can look for it in the description. I put out relatively regular videos addressing Christians of various stripes, because no one speaks for all Christians, of course. But I address some of those issues as a former Christian. So if you want to check that out, please do.
Yeah, and the links to their videos regarding this discussion are in the description. You can find their channels there, and I will get Mike's blog and put that in there as well. It's not there currently. I will rectify that. And I want to thank both of you for having such a wonderful and productive conversation. I always appreciate it. If anybody's interested in hearing any other conversations on the channel, hit me up and let me know, and I will reach out to people and see what we can put together. So thank you both very much. And thank you to the live chat who tuned in. And if you're tuning in later, and to everybody, help elevate the discourse. Bye, guys.